Good morning. So the year 2020 marks the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. On this day, we take stock of the milestones achieved in safeguarding the rights of the child, as well as propose potential solutions to some of the pressing challenges confronting children in our time. I'm Brenda Zedaradido. Welcome to this inclusive discussion as we mark Universal Children's Day. And on that note, allow me to say Happy Children's Day to all the children watching KTN News Special Report this morning. Now, this morning on our special program coverage, we have a different guest, a lady and two gentlemen, who will be talking to us about what Children's Day is all about. So I need to give you their profile. So I'll begin with Job Osewe, who is the program coordinator at the Transdi Homes, Netherlands, Kenya country office. He is a child protection specialist. His experience includes child trafficking, OVIC programming, and sexual exploitation of children. He's joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. So that is the profile of Job. Now, let me introduce a lady in this discussion, Pauline Kedogo, who is an advocacy manager, SOS Children's Villages, Kenya, and advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She has over 7 years technical expertise in human rights, policy advocacy, and gender equality. I provide a technical advisory and possess extensive experience in policy advocacy, child rights programming, child rights governance, and child protection and gender programming. She'll be joining us at our city center studio. So that is a rich profile of Pauline right there. Now, the last gentleman to join us is Ibrahim Alubala, sorry for that. He's an advocate of the High Court, specializing in child rights and currently works as the technical specialist child rights governance and advocacy at Save the Children Kenya. He'll be joining us from Kakamega County. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for talking to us here this morning on this special broadcast when it comes to World Children's Day, also known as the World Children's Rights Day. So, let me begin with Job in this. Let me just introduce Job, and we begin this discussion with you, Job. So we're talking about a Children's Day. What are we celebrating about? Is there anything children can celebrate about?
Thank you, Brenda, and happy Children's Day to the viewers. And good morning to the fellow panelists that we are having here. We have a lot to celebrate for children during this day. A lot has taken place. And if you look at the theme of the day, is about investing in our future, means investing in children. So a number of steps have been made globally. We have various laws that have been put in place to guide the implementation of child rights within the space. Regionally, we've just talked about the African Charter that we are celebrating being 30 years. There are major milestones that have been done. And when you come to Kenya at national level, then the government has done major steps in terms of protecting the children in Kenya. We're talking about a number of laws that have been passed, that have been put in place to be able to protect children. There are others that are under revision just to be able to conform with the current dispensation that we're having. Children have a lot to celebrate because there are spaces for them to celebrate. This is joined by a number of development partners also supporting in terms of working with children to be able to realize their rights. Right. So it's a happy day for the children. I know there are a lot of things that still need to be done, but I think we'll be able to discuss that.
Yeah, there is. Yes, Job, there is a lot that we'll discuss about during this discussion about Children's Day. But let me bring in Pauline. And the reason as to why I want to pose this question to Pauline, it's because you're also an advocate of the High Court. You've done a lot of research. You've done a lot of groundwork when it comes to children. And you know, Pauline, on November 20th, 1959, the United Nations adopted the Children's Rights Declaration. And November 20th, 1989, almost all states, taking part in the UN, ratified the International Convention for Children's Rights. To this day, it's only the US and Somalia that have not ratified this convention. Pauline?
Yes, Brenda, thank you for your question. I think I've lost you at some point.
Can I repeat the question, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Okay, I'm talking about the ratification of the UN Convention, and it is all states, all countries except 2 have ratified that convention, and those 2 countries that have not ratified the convention is the United States and Somalia. So what is the reason as to why Somalia and the US have not ratified this convention that was actually brought about, that was adopted in 1989, November 20th?
Okay, so thank you for your question. Basically, the ratification of these treaties is to ensure commitment towards implementation of the rights of children, and this is done by the member states of the UN. So basically, it's about having the member states renewing their commitment towards the rights of children and the full realization of their governments. So I may not have the reasons as to why the 2 countries have not ratified, but basically the process is just to ensure that once you ratify these treaties, you become part and parcel in implementing all the provisions that are under the conventions and all these other treaties.
All right, so let me draw it back home. Let me bring it closer home, Pauline. So Kenya is among the countries that have ratified this convention, but still children here in the country don't feel protected by the government that is supposed to give them protection.
Yes, so I acknowledge that Kenya has actually ratified this convention and has actually domesticated these conventions into the Constitution, the African Charter, the Children's Act, amongst other laws and policies in place. So yes, having ratified, children are also experiencing a number of abuse issues because of some of the gaps that are seen even within the community. So we appreciate that there are systems and structures that have been put in place, for example, by the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection, where we have the Department of Children's Services, the National Council for Children's Services, amongst other systems and structures who continue to play a pivotal role towards ensuring that these rights are realized. And some of these gaps maybe that I could speak to. One, I will talk about the issue of budgeting for children in the country. So even as we go about the emerging concerns about revenue allocation at the county and national level, the biggest question of concern is, do we have directions, guidelines, or policies that speak to allocation of resources towards child welfare programming in Kenya? So this could be one of the gaps that children are actually experiencing and not able to realize their full rights. Then the other issue is also on the participation of children, having their voices heard on all matters that concern them.
All right. So, Ibrahim, I mean, Children's Day by the UN aims at attracting the attention of important issues that need to be addressed. So talk to us about the issues that need to be taken into consideration during today's celebration.
Yeah, thank you very much, and once again, good morning to our viewers from all over the country. Yeah, the issues about, maybe just to reiterate what Pauline had indicated around the convention, and like you properly brought it out during the introduction, this convention traces its roots to the first declaration that was made immediately after the First World War. That is when the international community turned its attention to look at issues of children, and they insisted that children should have, certain rights regarding education, regarding healthcare, regarding protection, and so forth and so on. This was amplified after the Second World War in the convention that you've just mentioned, the second, sorry, not convention, but declaration, the Second Geneva Declaration of 1959, which was endorsed on the 20th of November, and that marks, that's the reason why we actually mark this day as the International Day of the Child. Now, in 1979, the international community began efforts around developing a binding legal instrument that would protect children, and this was suggested by the Republic of Poland. But this convention took 10 years to draft. So between 1979 and 1989, the international community was involved in the drafting of the document. And like you rightly pointed out, there are quite a number of rights that are envisaged in this convention. like you've also rightly mentioned, this is the most widely ratified instrument, with only the countries that you mentioned failing to deposit instruments of ratification. So there have been an attempt to actually push these countries to ratify. And at one point, the USA indicated that it would ratify during Obama's administration, but we've not seen that happening. They have raised a number of issues regarding issues around age, of definition of the age, but they are yet to ratify. Somalia is a different case because we know that they have not had a stable government since the collapse of the Said Barre regime in 1991. But we are hoping that once they put their act together and they have a good government, they'll probably ratify so that we have what we call universal ratification. But going back to your question around, okay.
No, kindly finish your statement, Ibrahim, it's okay.
No, going back to your question around the implementation, we've had a lot of challenges on aspects of health, on aspects of education, on aspects of child protection, and participation of children, because these are the four main categories. And we know here in Kenya, we have high, much as we've improved in terms of child survival statistics, we still haven't achieved that. We've seen a lot of child protection cases rising, particularly in light of the COVID-19.
All right.
We have seen child participation platforms not being operationalized, so there are quite a number of challenges as we look at the implementation of this convention. Thank you.
All right, so Job, I really like my panelists for this discussion because you're all experts in your area. So, I mean, you'll be giving me the answers that I need and also answers that our viewers need, especially children. So, Job, you deal a lot with specialization of children's rights. And the World Children's Day actually promotes the welfare of children around the world. But the saddest thing is there are children who are being raped. Others are being exchanged for labor in terms of being involved in labor work duties. And I'm so sure, walking around, you've seen children selling sweets. You've seen children working as house girls, children who are underage, children who are not, have not attained the age of 18. Yet we are talking about protecting the child, the right of the child.
Thank you, Brenda. And it's true that what you've mentioned are some of the challenges that we are still facing in the current era of time after all the laws that we are having. And it's true we meet some of these issues, and I think this will spring one of the challenges that we are facing even during the COVID-19. You talked about child labor, which we've really seen to have increased during this pandemic period due to the fact that there's some loss of jobs, there's fear of no employment among the families, and the only thing that is remaining for the family is to send out children to be able to fend for the families. So that's why you see a lot of children on the streets. But again, there are laws within the space that is supposed to be protecting children. The officials are supposed to be looking at in terms of protecting the children. Number two, you talked about child trafficking, and again, one of the issues that might lead to that is the exploitation. There is that exploitation aspect that also emanates from the trafficking component, and all this boils down to the poverty situation that most of the families or communities are in. Number three, the issue that I think you've not mentioned but is worth mentioning during the COVID-19, we're talking about issues of child, we talked about defilement, for example. That has been on the rise right now, defilement stroke incest. Just because children are at home, they are idle, nobody's monitoring them. Right. Then being banged at home, that has also exposed them into a lot of abuse that we are talking about right now. All right.
Thank you for that, Job. Job, I was about to tell you that you just hold your mind just a little bit because we shall be getting into that discussion about the effects of COVID-19 on children during this time of the pandemic.
Okay.
All right. So let me bring in Pauline. Pauline, an advocate, you deal a lot with issues to do with children, and according to the United Nations, parents, teachers and people from different walks of life play a crucial role in celebrations. However, they are the same people who are not protecting their children. And I'm so sure, Pauline, you've probably handled cases Or we've not even watched news, read it from the newspapers, we've even heard it from the radios of how fathers are molesting their own daughters.
Yes, Brenda, maybe perhaps just to start off from your conversation around the fathers molesting their children and all that, maybe I just want to mention that in 2019, the Violence Against Children survey was conducted in Kenya, and out of that survey, the findings actually brought to light that children experience the worst forms of violence within the family as the first place that they consider their place of safety. So this is to actually show us that much as there are mechanisms that have actually been put in place to protect these children, there are other gaps that are realized as a result of that. So there's need for one, raising awareness on the rights of the child, starting from the family level, the community level, county, national level, all those levels, raising awareness on the rights of the child. But secondly, we also need to have these children have their voice as part of this awareness raising, because they have rights and they also have responsibilities. Mm-hmm. The other thing is to ensure that laws are being enforced, because Kenya has a number of laws that talk about the protection of children. Constitution Article 53 talks about protecting children from all forms of violence, physical, emotional, and other different forms. We also have the Children's Act that has set out safeguards for these children, and other supporting laws that also talk about stiff penalties towards anybody who violates the rights of children. Right. So this is a space that we need to take to ensure that those perpetrating children, whether at family or community level, are actually brought to book.
All right, and Pauline, just stay with me, Pauline, because you've said something really important, that children, we need to hear the voices of the children. The voices need to be heard. So how can the voices be heard? Through what sort of channel can the children use to ensure that their voices are heard by the people who are supposed to be taking care of them?
Okay, so maybe I'll start by just mentioning that in this whole aspect of child rights programming, we look at the different developmental milestones of children. So for example, a teenager, 15 to 18 years, is able to express themselves on a number of issues. So it's about providing those child-friendly spaces to these children. And in Kenya, the government and other partners have come up with these platforms that you're actually talking about, and I'll just give examples. We have the Kenya Children's Assembly, which is supported by the National Council for Children's Services and the Department of Children's Services. So these are platforms where children meet, they deliberate on a number of issues, whether they touch on protection, governance, budgeting, participation, an array of issues where they can actually challenge the governance in the country so that their voice is heard. And we've actually had these children giving their voice into the current review of the children's bill from the different counties in Kenya. Then secondly, we have other community-based platforms, such as the child rights clubs, which are in a number of schools. And just to mention that even in our laws and policies, the Basic Education Act actually has a structure, the Board of Management, which has the provision of a child to participate and challenge on issues related to education or the governance in schools. So these are just examples of these platforms. And just to reiterate the fact that participation is a constitutional right for all citizens, including children, and this goes hand in hand with the child participation guidelines of 2008 that are already in place for Kenya and for practitioners to ensure that these children actually participate and have their voice heard. Thank you.
All right. So Ibrahim, when you're talking about, you know, it's good that Paulina said that children can use the child-friendly space to raise their voices. But when you're talking about child-friendly spaces, let's have a look at it, you know, through the internet in terms of technology. Some of the content that are put out there for children are really, it's really worrying for parents, because some of the things that they get to see what their children watch or the people they interact with really causes a lot of panic.
Yes, it's true, Brenda, because when we look at child participation, it's supposed to be guided also. It's not just supposed to be absolute, because we know that exposing these children, especially to, like you mentioned, internet, can also have its own, downside. And we are seeing that a lot when we are having online learning. Parents are actually allowing children to, access different platforms so that they can get their education. But beyond that, children could actually be could try to do other things, like, for example, access other sites that might prove detrimental to them. So one thing that we've kept on insisting is that the child participation, much as it's a right that is recognized, and use of internet, it should be guided, and parents should actually, or parents or caregivers should actually take the responsibility to ensure that the sites that their children are accessing are actually safe and are not detrimental to their well-being. We have witnessed cases where what we now call grooming of children is happening via internet, where children actually meet people who, eventually turn out to be child traffickers. We've seen cases where people meet up, children turn out, meet pedophiles through internet. And because children are impressionable, these people can actually use a language that can actually, draw your children to them, and eventually you lose them out of that. So one thing that we are saying in this time, particularly when children are accessing online learning, is that even as you leave your children to access internet, please exercise parental control and ensure that the children are actually accessing sites that are beneficial to them. Parliament has also done its bit in terms of enacting legislations around protecting children from such. The Misuse of Computers and Cyber Crimes Act has very elaborate provisions around protecting children and generally everybody.
All right.
But again, the challenge lies with the enforcement of some of those legislations.
All right.
We saw, I think, a month ago, the High Court declaring that law to be unconstitutional because it didn't go through Senate. And we are hoping that some of these things will be addressed so that in the fullness of time, we can have legislations that actually protect children. Pauline also mentioned that the Children Act of 2001 is currently under review. We now have the Children's Amendment Bill 2020. Fortunately, myself and Pauline were actively involved in the development of that piece of legislation, and we can confirm that it has very strong provisions around protecting children on some of the aspects that you've mentioned.
All right, and we shall be getting into the sort of the different types of laws that are here in the country when it comes to protection of children. And as we take that short commercial break right now, gentlemen and ladies, stay with me. We are taking a short commercial break. I leave you with this quote of the UNICEF Executive Director, Anthony Lake, and it says, on this Children's Day, we must confront the uncomfortable truth that around the world, the rights of millions of children are being violated every day. A short commercial break. I'll be right back.